March 17, 1943, Recklin Experimental Airfield, Germany. Hans-Werner Leischer's hand quivered slightly as he made the initial entry in his logbook, chronicling an event that would dramatically shift Luftwaffe comprehension of their adversary. It was inconceivable to think the Americans had constructed thousands of such machines. No nation could produce this level of sophistication on a wartime industrial scale while fighting a global conflict. Through the cockpit window of the captured Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress, labeled DLXXC by German forces, Leischer scrutinized an instrument panel that challenged 3 years of Luftwaffe intelligence assessments. The advanced variants of this aircraft would eventually feature 13 defensive gun positions. The B-17F model before him was equipped with 9 heavy-caliber machine guns capable of firing up to 750 fetal rounds per minute, creating a dense overlapping field of fire that revolutionized aerial warfare. In German hands, the captured fortress known as Wolf Hound marked the first intact American heavy bomber for Luftwaffe testing. The insights Leischer and his fellow test pilots would uncover over the following months would shake German confidence more severely than any battlefield loss. The firepower concentrated within this single aircraft, when scaled up across hundreds of bombers flying in defensive formations, constituted a level of aerial combat capability that German fighter pilots had never faced and their industry could not replicate. This transformation from enemy weapon to valuable intelligence source began 3 months earlier on December 12, 1942. Lieutenant Paul Flickinger piloted B-7F serial number 41, 245-85, nicknamed Wolf Hound, during a bombing mission against the ruined Sauterville Railway, marshalling yards in occupied France. As part of the 361 1st Bombardment Squadron within the 333rd Bombardment Group stationed at RAF Molesworth in Huntingdonshire, England, his aircraft was adorned with the unofficial name Wolfhound by American ground crew members. The 303rd Bomb Group, known as Hell's Angels, had only recently embarked on their first combat mission nearly a month prior and still lacked extensive combat experience. On that December morning, they deployed 20 B-7s for a sortie targeting Luftwaffe servicing facilities approximately 60 miles east of Paris. The mission commenced without incident, but German fighters from various units had other intentions. Messerschmitt Bf-9s and Focke-Wulf SS-9s pressed their attacks with relentless determination, understanding that disrupting the tight defensive formations offered their best chance for success. Machine gun and cannon fire ripped through Wolfhound's fuselage and wings. One engine faltered and stopped, its propellers spinning aimlessly in the wind. As one of the bombers began losing power with smoke emanating from its damaged cylinders, Flickinger found himself in a dire predicament as his crippled aircraft fell behind the protective formation. The other B-7s continued their journey toward England without slowing down, knowing that reducing speed would make them vulnerable to the German fighters swarming around them. Crossing the channel with a damaged bomber meant almost certain death due to an inability to maintain formation. Heading towards neutral Switzerland or Sweden entailed flying hundreds of miles over hostile territory while dealing with failing engines and relentless enemy aircraft pursuit. The sole option offering any hope for survival was making an emergency landing on enemy-controlled soil. Through breaks in the clouds and smoke from his damaged engines, Flickinger spotted what appeared to be a suitable field near Melun, France, roughly 60 miles southeast of Paris. Demonstrating remarkable skill despite his aircraft's extensive damage, he maneuvered the massive 30-ton bomber for an unpowered landing in a hayfield. Upon exiting the aircraft, the 10-man crew raised their hands, anticipating being taken prisoner. What they did not anticipate was how valuable their undamaged plane would prove to German intelligence. Within hours, Luftwaffe ground crews and Wehrmacht soldiers descended upon the captured fortress bomber. Engineers documented every system, structural detail, and technological feature before souvenir hunters or saboteurs could damage it further. Unlike other downed Allied aircraft that arrived in pieces, scattered across fields and forests with their secrets buried under twisted metal and broken components, Wolfhound sat nearly intact in a French field, ready for exploitation. Probri specialists immediately recognized the significance of this prize before them. This was not just another crashed bomber to be stripped for scrap, but the first B-17 Flying Fortress to fall into German hands in flyable condition. The capture offered an unprecedented opportunity to study American heavy bomber design, construction techniques, defensive armament, and operational capabilities. German technical personnel moved swiftly to transport the damaged yet salvageable bomber to Leeuwarden Airfield in the Netherlands, a key Luftwaffe base that had been converted from a pre-war Dutch civilian airport. The transportation process demanded meticulous planning and execution to avoid further harm to this valuable asset. 2 days after its capture on December 14, 1942, German mechanics completed emergency repairs to the battle damage. They topped off the fuel tanks with German aviation gasoline. American markings were replaced by German national insignia on both wings and fuselage, featuring large black crosses. A swastika was painted on the tail, while the aircraft's exterior boasted the distinctive red and black colors of Nazi Germany, signaling its new allegiance. 2 Messerschmitt B-9 fighter escorts accompanied the bomber during its ferry flight to Recklin, a premier testing and evaluation center for the Luftwaffe, located roughly 50 miles north of Berlin and Mecklenburg. The flight plan was disseminated to every Luftwaffe fighter base and flak battery along the route, with strict instructions not to engage the captured aircraft. U.S. captured aircraft. Nonetheless, some German forces mistakenly targeted their own prize, causing minor additional damage before recognition signals could be verified, and the attack ceased. This incident underscored both the eagerness of German troops to destroy American bombers wherever they found them, and the challenges faced by a military organization stretched thin across multiple fronts in coordinating such operations effectively. When Wolfhound landed safely at Recklin after its flight from the Netherlands, it entered an environment dedicated entirely to analyzing enemy technology. As the central testing facility for all Luftwaffe aircraft evaluations, Recklin was akin to facilities like Wright Field in Ohio or the British Royal Aircraft Establishment at Farnborough. Each captured Allied plane that could be restored to flying condition eventually arrived at this secretive base for thorough examination by German experts. Engineers pored over every aspect of foreign technology, seeking weaknesses and innovations worth emulating or countering. Hundreds of technicians, engineers, test pilots, and support staff worked diligently toward the singular goal of understanding how enemy aircraft functioned and how best to neutralize them. Following its arrival in mid-December 1942, Wolfhound was grounded for 3 months while specialists conducted exhaustive tests. They removed panels to inspect structural design, marveling at the sophisticated stressed skin construction that contributed significantly to the B-17's legendary resilience. Measurements were taken of skin thickness, alloy compositions analyzed, and rivet patterns tested for their robustness. Documentation of every system was meticulously compiled during this period. The extensive electrical network, spanning miles of wiring, highlighted American methodologies in aircraft systems integration. Sophisticated valve designs and precise pressure regulation were evident in the hydraulic controls. The oxygen distribution system showcased American expertise in high-altitude operations. The intercom system ensured clear communication despite engine noise. Pilots could manage fuel by transferring it between tanks to maintain optimal center of gravity, thanks to the sophisticated fuel management system. An engine synchronization system minimized pilot workload while maximizing performance efficiency. Each component was meticulously photographed from various angles, sketched in detailed technical drawings, all measured with precise instruments before being compared against equivalent German systems. Luftwaffe aeronautical engineers were astonished by the insights into American manufacturing philosophy revealed through the B-7's construction. Through the B-7's construction. Standardized parts meant that components manufactured at different factories would fit together without requiring custom fitting, and interchangeable parts allowed for quick replacement in field conditions. Simplified assembly sequences reduced the skill level needed from workers, enabling semi-skilled labor to construct complex aircraft. Every aspect of the bomber's design pointed to an industrial philosophy fundamentally divergent from German practices. While German aircraft required skilled craftsmen to handcraft intricate components through labor-intensive processes, American bombers utilized standardized modules that could be quickly installed by semi-skilled workers using jigs, templates, and fixtures. The implications were profound for German planners who grasped the significance of industrial capacity. If a single captured bomber demonstrated this level of manufacturing sophistication, it suggested an industry optimized for high-volume production, prompting questions about monthly and yearly output capabilities. When German intelligence analysts calculated these figures, they found that American production rates seemed impossible, yet proved to be conservative estimates. On March 17, 1943, Wolfhound made its first flight under Luftwaffe control from Recklin, piloted by Luftwaffe, an experienced test pilot known for his skill and judgment. Despite the aircraft's size, it handled smoothly and responded well to control inputs with surprising ease. American pilots had consistently praised the B-7's flight characteristics in reports intercepted by German intelligence or obtained through prisoner interrogations. German test pilots swiftly confirmed these assessments through first-hand experience. The Fortress demonstrated remarkable stability for its size, which ranged from about 15 tons when empty to up to 30 tons fully loaded. Even with one or two engines shut down during single-engine and twin-engine tests, the bomber remained controllable, a factor that explained why so many damaged B-7s returned safely to England despite sustaining significant combat damage. Throughout the spring of 1943, multiple German pilots conducted extensive testing on Wolf Hound in various profiles designed to explore all aspects of its performance and handling. At high altitudes, evaluations showed that the bomber could operate comfortably above 25,000 feet, where German anti-aircraft artillery became increasingly ineffective due to reduced projectile velocity and longer time of flight. Engine synchronization tests revealed advanced propeller control systems featuring constant speed propellers and automated governors, reducing pilot workload while maintaining optimal engine performance across different flight regimes. Formation flying exercises demonstrated the bomber's stability in close proximity to other aircraft, explaining how Americans could maintain tight defensive box formations that Luftwaffe fighters found challenging to penetrate without exposing themselves to concentrated defensive fire. The B-7's flight characteristics made it an ideal platform for formation bombing, where dozens of aircraft had to fly precise geometric patterns while under fire. The most significant tests for German fighter tactics involved the B-7's defensive armament. Understanding its weapons suite became a top priority for Luftwaffe tactical planners across all fighter units in the West. Every German fighter pilot needed to know the Fortress's blind spots, optimal angles of approach for survival, ranges where German cannons could strike without entering the lethal envelope of American machine guns, and tactics developed through trial and error in combat. The numbers alone were daunting to German planners who understood the implications. Later models, especially the B-17G entering service in summer and fall 1943, increased this to 13 guns through additional turrets and improved nose armament. Even 9 heavy machine guns represented more firepower than German bomber designs typically incorporated for defensive purposes. German bombers often relied on improvised defensive gun positions that were cramped and limited in traverse angles. The standard medium bomber, the Heinkel Hetch E-11, typically carried 6 or 7 machine guns of mixed caliber, many being rifle-caliber 7.92 Emanator weapons with limited effectiveness against attacking fighters. In contrast, a B-7F model had 9 heavy machine guns as standard equipment, each capable of firing rounds that could penetrate armor plate, destroy engines, shatter canopies, and kill pilots from ranges exceeding 600 yards. The 0.50 BMG cartridge used in these weapons produced 3 times the kinetic energy of German 7.92 Minute rounds, with performance comparable to that of German 13 Minutronic any heavy machine guns. Hans Baer Lehr, who would become the most experienced test pilot for captured Allied aircraft during World War II, extensively flew the Wolfhound throughout the spring and summer of 1943. His background in engineering from university studies, combined with years of glider flying and extensive experience in powered aircraft, made him well-suited for the demanding and dangerous work of test-flying enemy planes. During the war, he flew over 125 different aircraft types without suffering any serious crashes or damage, a testament to his technical skill and methodical approach when dealing with unfamiliar aircraft. When Lear first sat in the cockpit of the Wolfhound, there was no instruction manual, training program, checklist, or instructor available. He had to learn through observation and experimentation, studying controls and instruments while making educated guesses about their functions, and testing them carefully at altitude to avoid immediate fatal mistakes. The instrument layout differed significantly from German aircraft, featuring centralized panels with standardized gauge positions that remained consistent across different types of planes, allowing pilots to transition more easily between aircraft. The electrical system used circuit breakers instead of fuses, providing resettable protection that simplified troubleshooting and maintenance. Hydraulic pressure indicators were calibrated in pounds per square inch rather than kilopascals, deviating from German standards. Additionally, the throttle quadrant operated with reverse logic compared to German planes, where forward movement increased power rather than decreasing it. One of the most striking features for Lear was the bomber's remarkable robustness and damage tolerance. The B-17 could sustain extensive punishment that would have grounded similar German aircraft, continuing its mission even after sustaining what seemed like irreparable damage. Its structural integrity stemmed from heavy-gauge aluminum alloy frames and stressed skin construction, efficiently distributing loads across the entire airframe. Multiple redundant systems ensured single failures rarely compromised the mission's success. Self-sealing fuel tanks prevented fires from small-caliber hits, a technology the Germans understood but had not implemented as thoroughly. Critical crew positions and vital systems were protected by armor plate, with particular attention to safeguarding the pilots, engines, and fuel system. ATs and other test pilots conducted numerous firing tests to understand the B-17's defensive capabilities from an attacker's perspective. The perspective that was most crucial for German fighter pilots, who would be engaging these bombers in battle involved climbing into Messerschmitt Bf-19s and Focke-Wulf F-19s and Focke-Wulf F-19s to simulate attacks on a Wolfhound aircraft as it flew level or executed evasive maneuvers. Ground-based observers took photographs of the engagements while recording data such as angles, ranges, closure rates, and exposure times. Combat cameramen filmed these exercises from chase planes, capturing footage that would be used for training fighter squadrons throughout Germany and occupied Europe. These drills highlighted unsettling realities that contradicted pre-war assumptions about bomber vulnerability, particularly when attacking from directly behind. The traditional German tactic of intercepting bombers, which had been effective against earlier Allied aircraft with limited defensive armament, left the fighter pilot exposed to intense rearward fire from B-7 bombers. The tail gunner's position in a powered Cheyenne turret provided excellent visibility through clear plexiglass panels and controlled a field of fire directly behind the bomber without blind spots within 30 degrees of the tail axis. The dorsal turret, designed by Sperry and equipped with 2.50 caliber machine guns, could rotate to reinforce the defensive barrage from the rear. This addition doubled the number of guns targeting an attacker approaching from that direction. Even waist gunners positioned at open windows along the fuselage could engage targets approaching behind them, or slightly below or to their sides. A fighter pilot closing in directly from behind faced a concentrated fire zone from 4 heavy machine guns, providing minimal time for evasion, typically 3 to 5 seconds before having to break away to avoid collision. The bomber's gunners fired hundreds of rounds into the attacking aircraft's path during this brief period, creating a cone of fire that the fighter had to penetrate. Luftwaffe combat reports detailed numerous instances where fighters were damaged or destroyed due to these defensive measures. Surviving pilots described engaging B-7 formations as flying directly into intense gunfire, likening it to entering a storm of tracers. At typical combat ranges between 400 and 800 yards, 1 in every 4 to 5 rounds fired was a tracer round, providing visual confirmation of the intensity of the defensive barrage. These tracers serve both as aiming aids for gunners and as psychological deterrents for attacking pilots. German fighter pilots often found themselves facing converging walls of fire from multiple bombers and instinctively broke off their attacks before reaching optimal firing positions. This psychological impact significantly reduced the effectiveness of German fighters, even when actual hit probabilities remained relatively low due to the challenges of deflection shooting at high closing speeds. Attacking from below offered different obstacles, but no better prospects for success against B-7 defenses. The Sperry Ball turret, known by American forces, ensured comprehensive coverage of the lower hemisphere with no blind spots. This ingenious design featured a gunner enclosed in a rotating sphere equipped with 250 caliber machine guns and a computing sight that aided in calculating lead angles for engaging fast-moving targets. The ball turret gunner operated within cramped quarters, kneeling with knees drawn up to their chest and an oxygen mask over the optical sight, allowing them to track targets across 360 degrees azimuthal movement and nearly 90 degrees elevation. Physical demands were severe due to limited space that did not accommodate a parachute or much movement, necessitating prolonged periods in a curled position during long missions. Despite these challenges, the defensive capabilities of the ball turret remained unparalleled, as no angle of approach from below could evade its field of fire. German pilots soon discovered through harsh experience that attacking from beneath a B-17 formation exposed them to concentrated fire from several ball turrets. Each turret followed their trajectory with mechanical accuracy and opened fire at maximum effective range. Side attacks faced waist gunners stationed in open windows along the fuselage, where they endured freezing temperatures, intense winds, and constant engine noise that impeded communication. The B-7F model featured staggered waist gun positions to prevent interference between gunners while maximizing coverage angles. One gunner was positioned slightly forward on the port side, while another was located slightly aft on the starboard side, each armed with a .050 caliber machine gun mounted on a flexible ring allowing wide traverse in azimuth and elevation. Attacking from beam angles meant flying through crossfire from both waist positions along with the dorsal turret, which could rotate to engage targets above the horizontal plane. The overlapping fields of fire created zones where multiple guns could target a single enemy simultaneously, increasing hit probability dramatically. This concentrated firepower compelled German fighters to execute high-speed slashing attacks instead of prolonged runs, thereby limiting their exposure time and accuracy. Based on Recklin's testing program, frontal assaults from 12,000 to clock high were identified as offering the best chance for success, minimizing exposure to defensive fire and targeting the bomber's weakest defensive zone, where fewer guns could be brought to bear. Early B-17 models, including the F variant represented by Wolfhound, featured only 2 or 3 flexible guns in the nose, operated by the bombardier and navigator, who had other primary duties during combat and were not dedicated gunners. These guns, mounted on sockets within the plexiglass nose glazing, offered limited traverse and required crew members to physically shift the weapons from one position to another. While the nose glazing provided excellent visibility for accurate bombing through the Norden bomb site, it offered minimal protection for those stationed there and restricted defensive firepower against frontal attacks. A skilled German fighter pilot could initiate an attack from a position directly above and slightly ahead of the target, diving down towards the cockpit and forward section of the bomber where the pilots were seated. By firing concentrated bursts at this vulnerable area before pulling away beneath the bomber, he would evade its defensive guns effectively. This strategy was first introduced by Hedman Egan Mir in late 1942, shortly before Wolfhound's capture. Through extensive combat experience and tactical analysis, Mir discovered that most B-7s had their primary defense systems oriented towards the rear or sides, making the nose area relatively unprotected. An attack from directly ahead meant both the fighter approaching at speeds between 340 and ft/as and the bomber flying into it at around 150 to 150 ft/ft would close the distance faster than 500 ft. This rapid approach gave the bomber's nose gunner only about 2 seconds to aim and fire accurately, as he had to contend with wind blast vibration and psychological pressure while tracking a rapidly approaching target. Conversely, the attacking pilot benefited from a nearly stationary target that grew larger in his sight, simplifying aiming calculations compared to deflection shots against crossing targets. When executed correctly by skilled pilots who could maintain their nerve, this tactic proved highly effective. Those German pilots who mastered the head-on pass achieved remarkable kill ratios, sometimes downing several bombers per mission. However, executing such an attack required exceptional courage and discipline. Not every pilot was capable of it. With fighter and bomber converging at over 500 mpf, closing distance at nearly 7,500 feet per second, the attacking pilot had to maintain a straight course towards the bomber's nose. From afar, this meant watching the target grow from a speck into a massive four-engine aircraft, filling their windscreen before firing cannons and machine guns at point-blank range of around 200 yards. Even slight hesitation or premature breakaway often resulted in wasted ammunition and exposure to fire from defensive turrets as they flew past. Successful frontal attacks were also perilous for the German pilot, given the risk of collision due to high closing speeds. Some pilots who became too focused on their target failed to break away in time, leading to catastrophic collisions with B-17s. Despite these risks, frontal assaults often resulted in significant damage to the bomber's forward sections, sometimes causing them to fall out of the sky. However, the robust construction of the B-17 meant it could withstand considerable trauma and continue flying, earning its reputation for toughness despite sustaining heavy damage. Unless the cannon shells fired by attacking fighters hit the cockpit directly or disabled multiple engines simultaneously, the B-17 Fortress frequently continued on its mission despite severe damage to the nose section. German fighter pilots had to ensure a complete and rapid destruction of these bombers, because even severely damaged aircraft often managed to reach England, where they would be repaired for future missions. The mere fact that wounded B-7s kept flying and fighting was considered a failed interception by the Luftwaffe, despite the risks taken by the attacking pilot. This comprehensive understanding of B-7 capabilities emerged from test flights at Recklin and combat reports gathered from various fighter units across Germany and occupied Europe. These insights were disseminated through tactical bulletins, training films, and intelligence briefings throughout the Luftwaffe. However, this knowledge did little to ease the concerns of German military planners, who recognized the strategic implications. Knowing an enemy's strengths does not diminish them, and American production capabilities continue to outpace those of the Luftwaffe by a significant margin. Between May and early June 1943, under Otto Kuno's supervision in Department E3, Wolfhound underwent further testing. The evaluation included measuring engine performance at various altitudes and analyzing supercharger efficiency to determine optimal operating parameters. Fuel consumption charts were created to illustrate the range under different conditions, all aimed at understanding the capabilities of the R-1820 radial engines that powered this aircraft. Each engine produced 200 horsepower at rated altitude, with 4 such engines mounted in NEL's positions below and ahead of the wings, providing a total power output of 800 horsepower to propel the 30-ton bomber to speeds nearing 300 mph at high altitudes and an operational ceiling above 35,000 feet, too high for effective German fighter operations without specialized equipment. German intelligence analysts estimated that Boeing and its subcontractors were manufacturing these complex aircraft at rates surpassing those of German heavy bombers by factors ranging from 5 to 10. These figures seemed impossible but were confirmed through multiple sources. If American industry could produce such advanced bombers in these quantities, while also building fighters, tanks, ships, and transport aircraft for global operations, what prospects did Germany have of matching such industrial output? This question troubled German planners who understood that modern warfare had become as much an industrial competition as a military one. On June 12, 1943, Wolfhound was displayed alongside other captured Allied aircraft at the Luftwaffe exhibition held at Lürtz Airfield. A B-24 Liberator demonstrated American approaches to long-range bombing from a different design perspective, while a P-47 Thunderbolt showcased the ruggedness and firepower prioritized in American fighter designs. Meanwhile, a P-51 Mustang highlighted the threat posed by long-range escort fighters that would soon accompany bomber formations deep into German territory. A P-38 Lightning showcased unique American design concepts with its twin-engine configuration. An Avro Lancaster exemplified British heavy bomber capabilities, while a de Havilland Mosquito highlighted the concept of fast bombers. A Hawker Typhoon demonstrated the British approach to ground attack missions, and various Spitfire variants illustrated the progression of British fighter aircraft development. The display served purposes beyond mere recognition training for German personnel. It aimed to acquaint them with enemy aircraft characteristics, markings, and identification features to minimize friendly fire incidents. Additionally, it showcased captured technology that could be studied by German engineers for potential adaptation or countermeasures. Moreover, the exhibit provided a stark demonstration of Allied industrial might and technical advancement, which was starting to surpass Germany's in several key areas. Luftwaffe officers who attended were left deeply concerned about what they observed. One participant noted later that the disparity in manufacturing quality between American and German aircraft was evident even to those with little technical expertise. American aircraft components exhibited precise fitment, a detail that impressed German craftsmen. The consistency of this quality across thousands of units indicated advanced quality control processes. Smooth finishes suggested meticulous attention to aerodynamic details, while careful assembly pointed to systematic production methods rather than ad hoc solutions. In contrast, German aircraft were increasingly produced under harsh conditions, with slave labor and constant Allied bombing disrupting supply lines and destroying equipment. This resulted in rough workmanship, misaligned panels requiring hand-fitting and makeshift repairs using non-standard materials. Even officers lacking technical knowledge could see the implications clearly. Germany was struggling to maintain production of outdated designs, while American factories churned out superior aircraft in vast quantities. Following its appearance at the exhibition, the Wolfhound returned to Wien for a final test program before being deployed operationally in July 1943. Engineers fitted it with glider towing equipment to assess its suitability for transport missions. These tests were successful from a technical perspective, showcasing the B-7's versatility beyond its primary role as a bomber and highlighting its suitability for transport missions. However, Germany's glider forces had suffered significant losses during airborne operations in Cree, where student paratroopers experienced 50% casualties, and elsewhere due to costly engagements. Consequently, practical applications of these towing tests were limited, because Germany lacked the necessary transport aircraft fleet and fuel reserves required for major airborne operations in 1943 and beyond. In September 1943, Wolfhound was reassigned from test facilities at Recklin to operational duty with one of the Luftwaffe's most clandestine units. Based at Rangdorf Airfield near Berlin, this Special Operations Wing operated unlike any other within the German Air Force. Its mission portfolio included long-range reconnaissance flights into enemy territory using aircraft that could blend in with Allied formations, inserting and extracting intelligence agents behind enemy lines, supplying German forces operating in partisan-controlled areas or cut off by advancing enemies, and testing experimental aircraft and weapons too sensitive for standard evaluation units. KG-2000's aircraft inventory was eclectic, featuring both German and captured Allied planes selected according to specific mission requirements, rather than standardized logistics. The unit flew various types such as the Junkers Ju-290 transport aircraft, the Heinkel Hey Uniden medium bomber, and a Junkers Ju-5D2 transport alongside Soviet and American bombers for operations on different fronts. The B-70's long-range capabilities exceeding 2,000 miles, high-altitude performance over 25,000 feet, and robust construction capable of surviving damage in harsh conditions made it particularly suitable for many KG-20,000 missions. German radar operators might mistake these intruders for friendly aircraft returning from European missions, allowing them to penetrate enemy airspace undetected or unchallenged. This deception could provide valuable time before defenses reacted, crucial for mission success. Even in daylight, a B-17 flying at high altitudes could temporarily join American formations to gather intelligence on tactics, formations, and radio procedures. At Rangdorf Airfield, Wolfhound received a new paint scheme designed for night operations over Allied territory. Dark camouflage colors in blues and grays replaced the earlier yellow undersurfaces and mottled greens used during testing. KG-200 side codes beginning with A3 were applied to both sides of the fuselage, identifying aircraft to German forces while maintaining some operational security about their unit assignment. Records indicate that Wolfhound was eventually coded A3AE, although some sources suggest it might have carried multiple codes depending on mission requirements. Detailed documentation of Wolfhound service with KG-200 remains lost or scattered across archives destroyed or dispersed during and after the war. Some records were concealed by participants who survived into the post-war era, when certain operations remained classified for decades, while others may never have been created due to the secretive nature of special operations work. Post-war research by aviation historians revealed that KG-200 operated no fewer than 4 captured B-7 aircraft between late 1943 and mid-1944. Some sources even suggest the number might have been higher during peak operations. These bombers were active in various theaters across Europe, North Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East, engaging in some of the most critical areas of World War II. Their missions included transporting essential personnel or equipment to isolated German garrisons cut off by Allied advances, as well as inserting intelligence agents into Allied-controlled territories via parachute drops at night or high-altitude bailouts that allowed agents to land far from the aircraft's intended course. Other missions involved reconnaissance flights aimed at photographing potential invasion sites, bomber bases, and supply concentrations indicative of future Allied operations. Details about some of the most sensitive operations remain undisclosed decades after the conflict ended, known only to those who participated and have since passed away. Hans Vera piloted other captured B-7 aircraft that eventually made their way to Recklin, following the transfer of Wolfhound to operational service with KG-200. On October 9, 1943, a B-17F serial number 42-3033-6 named Miss Nonly 2 by its American crew landed in a field at Norholm Estate near VA in Denmark after experiencing engine issues during a mission over Germany. Despite the difficulties, the pilot executed a controlled landing that preserved the aircraft's integrity when the crew bailed out over Denmark. German recovery teams swiftly arrived to salvage this valuable asset and took it to Esbjerg Airfield before moving it to Recklin for evaluation. Lurs himself flew the aircraft from the field without any instructional materials or ground training, highlighting both his exceptional piloting skills and the B-7's forgiving nature even under challenging conditions. The captured bomber was designated 7+8 by the Germans and served in testing roles until at least December 1944, when records indicated it was still engaged in test missions. Each new capture offered fresh insights into the aircraft's design and capabilities. Engineers meticulously compared different production blocks to identify potential vulnerabilities or improvements requiring new German countermeasures. They also tested various ammunition types against B-7 structures to determine optimal attack profiles for fighter pilots. Additionally, they evaluated the effectiveness of different German cannon calibers against American armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, discovering that while their 20mm cannons were marginally effective, 30mm cannons proved devastating when hits were achieved. These extensive tests painted a comprehensive picture of an aircraft representing the pinnacle of American bomber development in 1943. A single B-17G, the final and most heavily armed variant entering service by summer 1943, was equipped with 13 Browning M2 machine guns of A50 caliber positioned for complete defensive coverage. These weapons fired standard 50 BMG ammunition at rates between 750 to 800 rounds per minute, capable of sustained fire limited only by ammunition capacity and barrel heat buildup that required careful management by gunners. The standard ammunition load for a B-7G bomber was around 7,500 rounds distributed among all gun positions. This allocation ensured each gun position had hundreds of rounds available for defense throughout extended missions over Europe, adhering to a carefully balanced scheme that took into account both defensive coverage and weight limitations. In the tail turret alone, there were 1,000 rounds split between two guns, which was adequate for sustained engagement against pursuing enemy fighters. The dorsal turret carried similar quantities to enable the top turret gunner to maintain effective fire over an extended period. Despite tight space constraints within the ball turret, it still housed between 250 and 500 rounds per gun, based on mission requirements and the gunner's size. Each waist position was equipped with 600 to 800 rounds for their flexible guns. The nose positions, including the chin turret and G models, were similarly loaded to ensure sufficient ammunition throughout the entire flight duration. When German test pilots at Recklin calculated the simultaneous firing rate of a single B-17G's 13 guns at approximately 75-50 rounds per minute each, the result was astonishingly high, approaching 10,000 rounds per minute in total. This translates to roughly 60-80 heavy machine gun bullets per second, creating an intense cone of fire that filled the airspace with lethal projectiles. American bombers never operated solo over enemy territory. The doctrine of American daylight strategic bombing evolved through pre-war planning and was further owned via combat experiences during 1942 and 1943. This strategy relied on massed formations where multiple bombers provided mutual defensive support, significantly increasing the firepower any attacking fighter would encounter. Colonel Curtis LeMay's combat box formation positioned bombers in tight three-dimensional arrays to enhance mutual defense capabilities. Each aircraft's guns could cover its neighbors effectively. Each aircraft's guns could cover its neighbors of three closely aligned planes flying either in a V formation or an echelon depending on tactical requirements. Three such squadron elements stacked vertically and offset horizontally formed a squadron box of 9 bombers. 3 squadron boxes combined to form a group box containing 27 aircraft, although some groups flew with 4 squadrons for a total of 36 bombers. A typical 3-squadron group box could range from 18 to 27 aircraft, depending on attrition and maintenance status. Assuming a mix of F and G models in the formation, if each bomber carried 9 guns instead of 13, the group's combined defensive armament would still exceed 8-9 heavy machine guns, providing interlocking fire coverage. 3 such groups formed a wing box with between 54 to 81 bombers and 500 to 700 machine guns, creating overlapping zones of intense defensive firepower against attacking fighters. German fighter pilots who encountered these formations often described a scene where they faced a wall of tracer rounds. This vivid imagery effectively conveyed the intense visual and psychological impact of coordinated defensive fire from multiple machine guns. At typical engagement distances ranging between 400 to 800 yards, every bomber gunner would open fire simultaneously upon detecting an approaching fighter, creating a mesmerizing yet terrifying display of concentrated firepower. With up to 50 or more machine guns focusing on a single aircraft during head-on passes, the sheer volume of bullets made it nearly impossible for the pilot to penetrate the formation without sustaining significant damage. Despite this overwhelming defensive barrage, many pilots experienced severe psychological stress, even when the likelihood of actually being hit remained relatively low due to challenges like deflection shooting and estimating range accurately. Reports from Luftwaffe after action assessments revealed numerous instances where fighter pilots aborted their attacks prematurely before reaching optimal firing range because they could not muster the resolve to fly deeper into such intense defensive fire. For those who continued their assaults, the odds were heavily stacked against them due to the arithmetic advantages enjoyed by the defenders. Indicated that an average of 20 hits from 20 mini-mean cannon shells was necessary to bring down a B-17 bomber from a rear attack. However, this number assumed that these impacts would be distributed across various vulnerable systems rather than concentrated on one specific area. The robust design features of the B-17, including its durable construction, redundant systems, and self-sealing fuel tanks, allowed it to withstand substantial damage while still remaining airworthy. On average, a pilot's accuracy against maneuvering targets at combat ranges was approximately 2%, as determined through analysis of gun camera footage and ammunition expenditure reports. Consequently, achieving the required 20 hits for a kill meant firing roughly 1,000 rounds of 20 mm ammunition. Early models of the Focke-Wulf FW-1 tiny fighter aircraft carried only 500 rounds in total across 2 cannons, each holding 205 rounds. Even with upgrades to 4 cannons and belt-fed ammunition, pilots were still limited to approximately 500 to 600 rounds overall. This amount was often insufficient for multiple attack runs before the pilot would run out of ammunition, known as Winchester, and be forced to retreat to base for rearming. In contrast, bomber crews maintained their defensive fire throughout the mission duration, with thousands of rounds available from their 50-caliber machine guns. While individual gunners faced challenges in hitting fast-moving targets due to issues like deflection shooting and high closure speeds, the sheer volume of sustained fire ensured that hits became statistically inevitable when numerous bombers focused on a single attacking fighter. As American bomber formations grew larger and more frequent during 1943, Luftwaffe fighter losses escalated significantly. This trend persisted despite efforts by German forces to replenish their depleted ranks faster than combat attrition and training accidents could deplete them. While frontal assaults offered higher kill ratios for highly skilled pilots due to better visibility of the target, they also required exceptional courage and skill given the extremely high closure rates involved, exceeding 500 mt/s when both aircraft approached each other at full speed. This rapid change in relative positions demanded constant vigilance and split-second decision-making from the attacking pilot. Estimating range accurately became crucial for successful attacks because firing too soon would waste ammunition while waiting too long increased the risk of collision. The optimal time frame per effective shooting lasted about 2 seconds, from 400 yards down to 100 yards. This short interval required meticulous timing and precision. During these critical moments, fighter pilots had to aim carefully while accounting for their aircraft's movements and compensating for the bomber's evasive maneuvers, such as slight turns or altitude changes. They needed to fire multiple bursts while continuously adjusting their aim between each set of shots and initiate breakaway maneuvers before any potential collisions occurred. This required extensive practice in realistic combat scenarios and extraordinary reflexes owned by experienced pilots alone. Captured B-17 aircraft at WWII provided German fighter pilots with an unprecedented opportunity to study their targets intimately, which was impossible during actual engagements. They meticulously inspected the bomber from all angles, documenting gun positions and their firing arcs. By entering through waist windows, they explored the cramped interior spaces, gaining first-hand experience of the challenging conditions faced by bomber crew members. Sitting in various gun stations, including the ball turret, they tested the limits of traverse and elevation while identifying blind spots where attackers could avoid defensive fire if approaching from specific angles. Or formation exercises were conducted with bombers practicing evasion techniques as fighter pilots owned their approach strategies and firing solutions. This type of training was invaluable for experienced pilots who learned to exploit the B-7's vulnerabilities through methodical analysis. However, by late 1943, the Luftwaffe faced a rapid decline in seasoned pilots, unable to train replacements quickly enough with comparable expertise. The B-17G model, introduced in late 1943, featured a distinctive chin turret under the nose, equipped with remotely operated machine guns that could engage targets directly ahead. Controlled by the bombardier using a computing gun sight, this added turret significantly enhanced the bomber's front defense against head-on attacks. This new feature allowed for continuous tracking of an attacking fighter from initial detection at long range through to close approach, concentrating fire along the predicted intercept path. In conjunction with cheek guns operated by the bombardier and navigator, as well as the top turret which could pivot forward to contribute its 2 guns to the defensive barrage, a B-17G could deploy up to 8 heavy machine guns against frontal attackers. This formidable array of firepower created an extensive protective cone that demanded exceptional skill from attacking pilots to penetrate effectively. This compelled the Luftwaffe to adapt once more, seeking innovative tactical solutions in response to the evolving defensive challenges. Other pilots approached from below the bomber's nose, attempting to remain beneath the chin turret's depression limits while avoiding detection by the ball turret. Some resorted to standoff weapons, launching unguided rockets beyond the effective range of machine guns and hoping for lucky strikes within tightly packed formations, where even near misses could cause damage through collisions. The Granit 21 cm rocket became a preferred weapon among German fighter squadrons, launched from tubular launchers attached under the wings. These unguided projectiles carried large, high-explosive warheads designed to disperse bomber formations via blast effects rather than precise hits. Although the rocket's hit probability was low due to their poor ballistic properties, an explosion within a combat box could simultaneously damage multiple bombers through blast and fragmentation, or cause collisions as pilots took evasive action. However, standoff attacks also had significant drawbacks that limited their effectiveness. The rockets were accurate only up to 800 yards, adding considerable weight that reduced fighter performance and generating substantial drag, making the launching aircraft vulnerable to Allied escort fighters like the P-5 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts. By 1944, these American escorts could accompany bomber formations all the way to Berlin and back, eliminating the sanctuary previously enjoyed by German fighters deep within their own territory. The technological competition persisted throughout 1943 and 1944 as both sides pursued advantages. The Luftwaffe developed heavier cannons, including the 30 mm capable of destroying bombers with a few hits, improved guidance systems for larger rockets, and even experimented with aerial bombing where fighters dropped small bombs onto bomber formations from above formation. The Americans enhanced defensive armament on their aircraft, refined formation tactics through trial and error, and introduced better escort fighters with longer ranges and superior performance. However, one inescapable reality overshadowed all tactical innovations. American industry could replace losses faster than German industry, despite the vast ocean separating them. Every B-17 shot down over Europe represented a tactical victory for the Luftwaffe pilot, but only a strategic victory if it prevented future missions. Within weeks, sometimes just days, another brand new bomber would emerge from production lines in Seattle, Long Beach, or Burbank, arriving in England with a fresh crew ready to resume bombing operations. Production figures illustrated an overwhelming material advantage that German intelligence analysts acknowledged yet could not counter. Between 1935 and 1945, Boeing, Douglas, and Vega produced 12 76E-1 B-17-45, 18 B-74Es, the majority during the war years of 1943 and 1944. In 1944, Boeing alone was producing approximately 316-2 B-17 bombers per month, which translates to more than 12 aircraft daily from its single manufacturing site. An achievement that seemed inconceivable to German observers, but was confirmed by multiple intelligence sources. Despite having a technologically advanced aviation industry at the start of the war, Germany never managed to match these production levels with its own four-engine bombers. The Heinkel-Hay 777, the sole operational four-engine heavy bomber in the German inventory, and the result of years of development, suffered from chronic engine fires due to its unique coupled engine design and numerous mechanical issues that significantly reduced its operational availability. Total production across all variants barely surpassed 100 aircraft between 1942 and 1944, with poor availability leading many units to decline accepting the type in favor of twin-engine medium bombers despite their inferior range and payload capacity. Germany struggled to match American heavy bomber production both quantitatively and qualitatively. This shortfall stemmed from strategic decisions, industrial organization, and resource constraints. When Luftwaffe pilots learned these production statistics through intelligence briefings intended to prepare them for the scale of opposition they would face, morale among thoughtful pilots plummeted as they realized the futility of shooting down one fortress only to have another 10 replace it within a week. The captured B-17 at Recklin provided German engineers with insights into American manufacturing techniques that enabled such prodigious production rates. They studied the modular construction, allowing subassemblies manufactured in different factories across the United States to fit seamlessly during final assembly, requiring minimal hand fitting. The standardized components sourced from hundreds of subcontractors nationwide created an unprecedentedly complex yet efficient supply chain. The simplified assembly sequences allowed semi-skilled workers, including many women entering industrial work for the first time, to build complex bombers in a fraction of the time required by experienced German craftsmen using traditional methods. German reports from these studies expressed grudging admiration for American industrial organization while acknowledging the impossibility of replicating such methods. The B-17 was more than just an example of individual engineering excellence or clever design solutions. It exemplified a manufacturing philosophy prioritizing production volume over artisanal quality, interchangeable parts over custom fitting, and adequate quality over perfection. Every design decision reflected this mass production mindset. Standardized fasteners throughout the aircraft reduced inventory requirements and simplified assembly, while straight panels with minimal compound curves facilitated forming operations and minimized scrap rates. Modular subassemblies facilitated concurrent assembly of fuselage sections, wings, and tail components, which required minimal fitting during final integration, significantly cutting down production time. This method allowed Boeing's Seattle plant to produce a B-17 every hour at peak capacity, an achievement that seemed implausible to German observers, accustomed to measuring production rates in weeks per aircraft. In contrast, German factories adhering to traditional aircraft construction techniques involving custom-fit parts and hand-riveted assemblies with skilled labor dominating most tasks needed several weeks to manufacture a single bomber. The strategic implications of this disparity were clear and unavoidable for anyone familiar with industrial output capabilities. Even if German fighters achieved favorable kill ratios in aerial combat, shooting down 2 or 3 bombers for every fighter lost, American industry could maintain such losses indefinitely, while the Germans could not. By mid-1944, even the most optimistic German commanders acknowledged this reality. The question ceased to be whether Germany could win the air war over Europe, and instead focused on how long its forces could persist against overwhelming material disadvantages before inevitable collapse. The captured B-7s at Recklin, including Wolfhound, provided the Luftwaffe with a comprehensive understanding of the Flying Fortress as a weapon system. They comprehended its robust construction and heavy defensive armament, but also identified its vulnerabilities, such as the weak nose section on early models and blind spots in gun coverage. The Germans documented the bomber's range, altitude, bomb load, and formation flying capabilities. They recognized both its strengths and limitations, including the importance of cohesive formations and susceptibility to frontal attacks from determined adversaries. Despite this knowledge, they could not alter the fundamental arithmetic of industrial production that dictated strategic outcomes. For every German pilot trained in effective B-7 interception through practice at Recklin or combat experience, 10 new American bomber crews were being readied for duty. For each fortress shot down over Germany due to superior tactics, 5 more were built by American factories. While a dozen raids might be disrupted by successful interceptions, the following week would see even larger formations flying in. The defensive armament that impressed German test pilots represented just one facet of an integrated system designed to project American strategic bombing capabilities deep into enemy territory, despite strong opposition. The B-7's combination of over 2,000-mile range, high-altitude performance above 25,000 feet, heavy bomb loads ranging from 4,000 to 8,000 pounds, depending on mission requirements, rugged construction capable of sustaining significant damage, and potent defensive armament collectively formed a formidable aerial weapon. When deployed en masse in coordinated formations, it fundamentally altered the nature of warfare. Luftwaffe General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most accomplished fighter pilots with 104 confirmed victories, and later commander of German fighter forces, extensively documented in his post-war writings the difficulties encountered while defending against American daylight bombing raids. He recognized that individual German pilots frequently had superior training and extensive combat experience compared to their American counterparts, who were often on their first mission. Aircraft like the Focke-Wulf F-9 long nose variant and Messerschmitt Bf-10 DK-4, used by German fighters towards the end of World War II, outperformed Allied planes in terms of speed, climb rate, and maneuverability. Additionally, German cannons were far more powerful than American .50 caliber machine guns, capable of delivering explosive shells that could easily destroy bombers with just a few hits. Nevertheless, despite these advantages, German fighters were unable to halt the relentless daylight bombing campaign, which systematically dismantled Germany's industrial capacity. In his post-war writings and interviews, Galland attributed this failure to several factors: However, he placed American industrial capacity at the top of that list. The United States' ability to produce an abundance of war materials faster than Germany could destroy them, whether bombers, fighters, tanks, or other equipment, was pivotal. Captured B-17s confirmed this reality for German engineers and planners who thoroughly analyzed every component of the aircraft without finding much to criticize from an engineering standpoint. The bomber's design was seen as a mature integration of cutting-edge technologies executed with manufacturing excellence. No tactical ingenuity or superior pilot skill could compensate for such disparities in material production during a war of attrition. Hans Verliers, who tested numerous captured aircraft at Recklin and other facilities, flew over 125 different types without causing serious damage to any aircraft or injuring himself. His post-war reflections highlighted professional admiration for Allied aviation technology while expressing frustration with Germany's inability to match the production rates and organizational efficiency of its adversaries. Among various models from different nations, he found the B-17 particularly significant as it embodied American strategic bombing doctrine in its design. Every aspect of the bomber, from defensive armament to its ability to deliver heavy payloads precisely, supported its mission profile of penetrating deep into enemy territory, delivering bombs accurately using the Norden bomb sight, and returning home despite intense fighter opposition and anti-aircraft fire. The robust defensive weaponry on board was crucial for this mission's success. Without it, daylight strategic bombing would have been impractical, no matter how many bombers the Americans produced. Unescorted flights would have faced devastating losses from German fighter. But as they aircraft Bull 1 on BND 17 big and the M big sim big Bull 1 dick fix and dick fix and dick fix and dick fix you big nick fix and dick fix you vix and dick thing. He says zing the thing the he sing the ing the using the you on mine whiny their efforts. These actions also underscored the strategic limitations of Germany by highlighting the vast industrial might of the United States. Each hour spent by German engineers repairing captured American planes meant less time available to maintain their own aircraft. Every drop of fuel used in testing enemy bombers was unavailable for combat operations. Every bullet fired during evaluation exercises represented ammunition that could not be spared elsewhere. Meanwhile, U.S. factories continued to churn out more B-7s daily, replacing losses faster than combat could cause them. Even 8 decades later, the production figures remain astonishing. Boeing's Seattle plant, alone manufactured 6 Assen T-81 B-17 variants from the initial Y-1 B-17 through the final B-17G model. Douglas contributed an additional 3,000 aircraft from its Long Beach facility between 1942 and 1945, while Vega added another 2,050 from Burbank during the same period. By war's end, total production surpassed 12,000 T-35. Each bomber consisted of around 40,000 individual parts produced by hundreds of subcontractors. Each bomber consisted of around 40,000 individual. The planes featured 4 Cyclone R-1820 engines, generating 2,000 horsepower each, miles of electrical wiring, thousands of pounds of aluminum forming the airframe, and up to 13 heavy machine guns with thousands of rounds of ammunition. In contrast, Germany managed to build fewer than 2,000 similar bombers throughout the war, despite beginning with a more advanced aviation sector in the 1930s and having developed strategic bombing concepts. The disparity in production extended beyond mere industrial capacity or factory space. American military doctrine emphasized heavy bombers for deep penetration missions and strategic targeting, whereas Germany focused on medium bombers and dive bombers optimized for close air support of ground forces. This difference reflected a fundamental divergence in military philosophy. American geography, safeguarded by vast oceans inaccessible to enemy forces, allowed unhindered expansion and operation of factories, while German industry faced relentless Allied bombing that destroyed facilities, killed workers, and disrupted supply chains. Wall workers. The United States also benefited from an educational system that annually produced thousands of skilled engineers, managers, and technicians, whereas Germany struggled with manpower shortages as casualties mounted over time. Ultimately, the American political and economic systems proved more adaptable to total war mobilization than the rigid Nazi hierarchy marked by competing power centers, inefficient decision-making processes, and ideological constraints. The B-17 Flying Fortress was just one weapon in America's extensive arsenal, yet it embodied the entire infrastructure of American war manufacturing. When Luftwaffe officers inspected the captured aircraft at WWII, examining its construction, testing its systems, and conducting evaluation flights, they were essentially studying the broader capacity of American industrial civilization. What they discovered should have been evident to anyone who objectively analyzed American production capabilities from the start. You cannot defeat an opponent who can produce bombers faster than you can destroy them, train crews more rapidly than your losses occur, or deliver bombs in greater quantities than your nation's entire industrial output across all sectors. The defensive firepower that German test pilots found impressive was merely a visible sign of deeper American advantages in organizational efficiency, resource allocation, and economic mobilization. The real secret weapon wasn't the 13 machine guns mounted on the B-7DG. It was the economic and industrial system capable of designing, manufacturing, and deploying 12 per 70-66 bombers while simultaneously producing 300,000 aircraft of various types, 88,000 tanks, 41 billion rounds of ammunition, and all other necessary equipment to fight a global war across multiple continents and 2 major oceans. No amount of tactical genius, pilot skill, or personal bravery could overcome the overwhelming disparity in industrial output. It's no surprise that Hans Verlecher, after flying numerous captured Allied aircraft and witnessing firsthand the quality and quantity of enemy equipment, concluded in 1943 that Germany had already lost the war based on industrial mathematics alone. The figures predicted defeat with mathematical certainty. The only remaining questions were when the end would come and at what final cost in terms of lives and destruction. The captured B-17 at WWII provided valuable tactical insights for German fighter pilots, revealing blind spots in defensive coverage that skilled pilots could exploit, identifying vulnerable systems such as hydraulics and oxygen supplies that could disable the bomber, and demonstrating attack profiles offering the best chance of success. However, these findings did not address the fundamental strategic question: how do you counter 10,000 bombers when your annual fighter production barely reaches 1,000? How do you defend cities against relentless raids when your pilots fly 3 to 4 missions daily until they are killed, wounded, or too exhausted to continue? How do you sustain industrial output and civilian morale knowing that American bombs will eventually reach every workplace? These inquiries lacked satisfactory responses within the context of Nazi Germany's war plans and industrial setup. The regime had initiated a conquest-driven conflict, anticipating rapid victory before adversaries could mobilize their economies and industries fully. When this core assumption proved incorrect, transforming the war into an attrition contest where endurance was crucial, decisions made in the 1930s sealed Germany's fate. The B-17 Flying Fortress, equipped with multiple heavy machine guns capable of firing 60 rounds per second into surrounding airspace and demonstrating American industrial prowess and organizational efficiency, posed not just a tactical challenge, but also a strategic indictment on the war's outcome. Test pilots at Recklin extensively flew captured B-7s and developed a grudging respect for American engineering, manufacturing, and military organization. They admired the bomber's robust construction that allowed it to survive damage typically fatal to other aircraft. Its thoughtful design prioritized crew survival and operational effectiveness. They acknowledged its formidable defensive firepower, making attacking formations perilous even for seasoned pilots. However, this respect did little to alter battle outcomes over Europe. Despite deep knowledge of enemy capabilities, the lack of necessary resources made victory unattainable when these were in short supply. By late 1944, many captured B-17s in German service had been destroyed or rendered non-functional due to various factors. Some fell victim to Allied bombing raids on German airfields as part of a campaign targeting Luftwaffe infrastructure. Others crashed from maintenance issues as spare parts became scarce with supply chains disrupted. A few continued special missions were KG-2 disrupted by this time. The Luftwaffe had acquired extensive knowledge about the Flying Fortress through years of study. They knew its blind spots where guns could not reach and its vulnerabilities in specific systems. They had devised strategies to assault it effectively under favorable circumstances. However, this tactical knowledge became increasingly inadequate against the overwhelming reality of thousand-bomber raids protected by hundreds of fighter planes that overwhelmed defenses with sheer numerical superiority. Throughout the war, individual German pilots continued to achieve remarkable successes against B-17 formations. Some aces downed dozens of bombers using refined attack methods, partly derived from studying captured aircraft at Reclin. Nevertheless, these heroic performances could not offset systematic industrial inferiority and numerical disadvantage. For each ace who survived long enough to develop expertise through numerous missions, 10 novice pilots perished on their first or second combat mission before acquiring effective tactics. By 1944, the average life expectancy of a German day fighter pilot was measured in weeks rather than months. Many never reached 10 combat missions before being killed or too severely injured to continue flying, leading to a downward spiral of decreasing experience levels. In contrast, the Americans implemented systematic crew rotation policies that sent crews home after completing 25 missions initially and later increased it to 35 as loss rates decreased. Survivors returned to training commands in the United States, where they imparted combat knowledge to new crews, fostering institutional learning that preserved lessons learned at great cost. This method of managing experienced personnel differed sharply from the German practice of keeping pilots on the front lines until they were killed, captured, or physically unable to continue due to wounds or exhaustion. These contrasting approaches reflected different industrial capacities and strategic situations. The United States could afford to rotate experienced crews into training roles because production ensured a constant supply of replacement aircraft and new trainees. Germany, however, lacked the resources to spare any pilots with combat experience. Every capable pilot remained on duty until killed, captured, or incapacitated, resulting in declining average experience levels across fighter units. Captured B-7s provided valuable insights into American defensive capabilities through systematic analysis by the Luftwaffe. The experience of engaging thousand-bomber raids taught harder lessons about American resolve, resources, and industrial endurance. Ultimately, this lesson was sealed on May 8, 1945, when the guns fell silent across Europe. Germany lay in ruins, its cities destroyed, its industry shattered beyond immediate repair, and its military crushed between Soviet forces advancing from the east and Western Allied armies moving from the west. The bombers had accomplished their mission over 2 years of sustained operations. German test pilots in 1943 were deeply impressed by the defensive firepower displayed by these fortresses. This capability enabled the planes to accomplish their missions despite suffering significant casualties. Nearly 5,000 B-7s were lost throughout the conflict. The narrative concludes where it started, above Europe's skies, a place where pilots fought and died in aircraft that embodied the industrial prowess, strategic ideologies, and combat philosophies of their nations. Hans Bahr survived World War II and lived until 1991, long enough to write his memoirs and contribute extensively to historical projects documenting Luftwaffe test pilot experiences. Throughout his life, he remained proud of his accomplishments while recognizing the futility of Germany's efforts and the inevitable outcome once American industrial might was fully unleashed. After the war, Hans Bahr's expertise in flying captured Allied aircraft made him a valuable asset to Allied intelligence services. The Wolfhound, the first intact B-7 captured by the Luftwaffe in December 1942 until its destruction in April 1945, provided critical insights into American bomber design, defensive tactics, and industrial capabilities over a span of 2.5 years. While these lessons were intellectually valuable to German aviators and engineers, they did not alter the strategic course. The sheer volume of fire from the B-17 machine guns, coupled with coordinated formation tactics and redundant weapon systems covering all angles, ensured that sufficient bombers could complete their missions despite heavy losses. This strategy worked even when considering the significant casualties among bomber crews. Some units experienced over a 20% casualty rate in 1943 and the relentless resistance from German fighters. Despite losing nearly 5,000 B-7s to various causes and suffering substantial crew losses, the strategic bombing campaign achieved its objectives. Germany's industrial capacity was devastated across numerous centers, cities were left in ruins after incendiary attacks, and transportation networks crumbled under sustained interdiction. By war's end, American factories continued producing B-7s at such a rate that all combat losses could have been replaced within 6 months, underscoring the ultimate futility of attempting to win against American industrial might. The seized B-17 bombers inadvertently bore witness to their own country's impending downfall as German service aircraft. Each test flight underscored American technological prowess, while every assessment report highlighted America's superior capabilities. Training exercises continually reinforced the same unavoidable reality. The United States had an unmatched industrial might that Germany could not hope to rival through any feasible means. The defensive armament was remarkable and commanded respect. With production levels so overwhelming, they became decisive in the outcome of the war. They were awestruck by the interlocking fields of fire covering every possible approach, the high-caliber weapons capable of engaging enemy aircraft from great distances, and the sheer volume of ammunition available for sustained combat engagement. Yet these defensive systems only represented a fraction of America's true strength. The full capacity of its arsenal of democracy operating in perfect synchronization. Once mobilized and unleashed, this formidable force proved insurmountable despite Germany's staunch resistance. Hundreds of fortresses would descend upon targets, bombs raining down relentlessly until Germany was overwhelmed by their onslaught. While the captured B-17s could offer tactical insights and expose vulnerabilities, they were powerless to alter the strategic superiority dictated by America's industrial prowess.